Okay, there you go. Okay, but everyone can hear me. And if you want to stop and ask questions, I'll pause. And I definitely there are points on the slides where I definitely have built-in time for questions. And I'm hoping that we can go back and forth in the slides depending on what your questions are. So let me get to here and let's share this. Okay. Is that big enough or should I go bigger?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. So if I need to go bigger, I can. And I learned a new trick today. So I learned how to use my pen. So I just want to let you know that, see guys, I learned a new trick. So
impressive.
Yes, I know. Every kindergartner can do it. It took me 55 years, right? Okay.
Well, I can't do that, so I am impressed.
Okay. So here we go. So how do you Jew? So thank you for coming to How Do You Jew? We're talking about this session. We're talking about Jewish denominations, how we express our faith, and then a little thing I like to call Minyan math. And it's basically how do we count? How do we see ourselves? And is it important to see ourselves in a certain way at all? And I hope that when we talk about this, that people will be more comfortable when they meet either with other Jewish people or they're in a room and trying to describe how they feel Jewishly. So this whole conversation is meant to, please, I'm going to turn off my pen, sorry. This whole conversation is just meant to make everyone feel comfortable and be able to ask whatever questions they want. I'm going to go to full screen. So if you do have a question, you're going to have to use your voice because I just went to full screen. It's easier for me. Okay, so we're going to talk about where the term Jew even came from anyway. We're talking about being a Jew by birth or conversion, a Jew by location and land, a Jew by religious practice. And those are the main three ways of dividing up the Jewish population. We're talking about fitting into categories or where you do fit. And then, of course, as I said, we're talking about Minyan math. And that's who counts, when they count, do they count, doesn't matter if they count. Okay, and again, as I pause at the end of each slide, I'll ask if you want questions. So I want to let you know that in the beginning, there was no such thing as a Jew. So a Jew is a relatively modern term, and there was no concept of the Jewish people. There was a concept in the old biblical era of being from a place. So you could be Madison from Persia, or you could be Ted from the Kingdom of Egypt, or Linda from the Principality of, Florida. You were a person and you were from a place. In fact, you probably didn't even have a last name. You were probably from an area. So in biblical Hebrew, there's about 42 instances in the Torah where we're talking about a man or someone from Yehudi, which only means the kingdom of Judah. Because as you know, in original Hebrew and Aramaic script and Aramaic language and some of the other languages, they never had the J sound. There was no J. They used a Y sound, and that's common to languages. For instance, when you are talking about someone in Spain, they may say, and when they say the word Jesus, they may say, Jesus instead of Jesus. So that's the first J word that came to mind. Sorry, guys. We didn't have that word. So there were no Jews in the beginning. There were only people from this area or people from this area. So eventually, as Judaism or as the Israelites or as the people from Judah, the areas were developed and the Romans came in and they had culture and city states and they started talking about concepts of people and branches of people. We are getting to the point where now we're starting to refer to people as people from Yehudi, kingdom of Judah, but we're also talking about Israelites for the first time. So an Israelite, it was someone in the Talmud who was from the area where we know Israel is now, or from the kingdom of David, or from the branch of David. So now we're talking about someone who descended from the people, the Israeli people, or Yisrael, but they're not really practicing Judaism as a religion. They're just same thing. We're talking about more place. And then it developed a little bit more until it became, okay, now we have the people who lived in Israel, but as you know, we never got to stay in Israel the whole time. We had this nasty habit of being kicked out. Conquered, we get kicked out. We go back, they kicked out. So there's always been people there, but we keep going back and forth. And so then the Talmud starts to use the term children of Israel. And there's quite a few times in the ancient history where the children of Israel were nearly wiped out. There was a remnant, but perhaps they didn't exactly know how to practice. They didn't know what they needed. So our terms moved again. So finally, early English, French, and other languages. Between 1000 and 1700, the languages began to drop sounds. They went from Old English, Old French, to Mid-English, Mid-French, Mid-German. All the languages started changing, and they started dropping sounds, changing pronunciations, until the point where the J sound became more common. And so eventually, from many different Yehuda, Yehudi, the J, Judy, you can already see where we're going. In German, it became, Jude, J-U-D. In French, it was actually Jude too. And so finally, we ended up with the word Jew or Jewish. And just so you know, even today, in the English language alone, there's 60 different spellings of the word Jewish or Judaic or Jew, J-U-I. There's many different ways to do it. The one thing I want to talk about, and the one reason I want to use the term or the word Jew, and the reason why I want to explain the dangers of using the word Jew, is the fact that depending on our history in English, how we use the word Jew, whether it's a noun or whether it's an adjective, can now mean something positive or something negative. And that is also why in the past, even as early as 1940, 1950, using the word Jew was totally proper. And you described anything that had to do with a Jew with that word. Now, many of you probably don't hear many people say Jew. Now you may hear people say Jewish. I'm Jewish. This is Jewish. They're from a Jewish family. Or they're an attorney, a Jewish attorney. You heard the word Jewish. And the reason why you hear the word Jewish now in modern culture is because, especially after World War II, the best example is the word Jude in Germany, how the word Jude was used as a weapon against the people. Many people have anti-Semitic slurs. And so a lot of times what they like to say is when you use Jew as a noun, in many cases, it's probably negative. If you use Jew as an adjective or a descriptor, it's probably okay. So the word can be used. I don't want you to be afraid of the word, but I also want you to understand and listen for when people are using that word and how they're using it. Does anybody have any questions about this page? Nope. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about being a Jew. And since biblical times, there have been two ways to become a Jew: by birth or by conversion. There's only two ways to become a Jew. Now, there are three positions in the Jewish congregation, but there are only two ways to become a Jew, and we are going to talk about that. Okay. So Jewish by birth or conversion. Okay. If your mother was a Jew, okay, or if your mother was Jewish, as we say now, if you're born of a Jewish mother, you're always a Jew. Every group, whether you're Orthodox, and we're going to talk about those groups later, whether you're Orthodox, whether you're Reform, whether you're Humanist, doesn't matter. If your mother was Jewish, you're always a Jew. And that was determined way back in the ancient days when they were trying to figure out how this was going to work. So there have been times in the ancient sandal days, or the sand and slippers, as I like to call it, days, when they weren't sure how to count Jewish people. But basically, this was standardized quite a long time ago. But one thing that people don't know is that if your grandmother was Jewish, you may be considered Jewish by most traditional communities, including the Orthodox, if there's an unbroken line from your Jewish great-grandmother to you. So for instance, if you know that your grandmother was Jewish, then you are 100% Jewish. And no one, especially if you can prove that, no one will ask you to convert. There's no conversion needed. So for instance, in some congregations where I've been a member, and they ask people without records how to show that they're Jewish, they say, can you go do an etching of a gravestone? Can you go to the gravestone and do a shaving or get a picture nowadays? Can you do that? Can you show through a old letter or an old thing? How can you show that you are Jewish? The other thing about this part of the Judaism is that it says nothing about practice. It says nothing about religion. All it says is that you're Jewish because your mother is Jewish, because your grandmother is Jewish. Okay? Does everyone follow that line? Okay. Now, the next way that you can become a Jew or be considered Jewish is through conversion. And there's conversion as an adult, conversion as a baby, and there is half conversion. I want to talk about half conversion. And a plan that's more modern, which is immersion for children and waiting for the B'nai Mitzvah. So some of you, or many of you, probably know somebody who was converted as an adult. So someone decided, I want to be a Jew. I want to join the Jewish community. I'm going to marry a Jew, and we would like to get married in a Jewish synagogue. So I'm going to go through conversion. And conversion can happen in many different ways. It can happen Orthodox, it can happen Reform, it can happen conservative. It's pretty standardized in the type of things that you have to do. But when you get converted, you're basically making an adult decision that you are going to do what you need to do, become a Jew, and you're going to follow the teachings of Judaism and practice the Jewish religion. When you're converted as a baby, so for instance, maybe a couple adopts a baby, and the baby was born from a mother who is not Jewish, you can convert a baby. It's pretty simple. Sometimes they do, they circumcise the baby if he's not circumcised and he's a boy. And then the parents stand in for the baby. However, when you're converting a baby, because you have to have consent to be converted as an adult. And a baby can't give consent, or neither can a small child. So before your 13th birthday, before you become a bat or bar mitzvah, the synagogue rabbis are to give the baby a chance, or the child now, to give a chance to renounce their conversion. If the child does not do it before their 13th birthday, they are automatically a baby. They're automatically a Jew. And nothing in the Orthodox, nothing in the conservative can take away your title as a Jew once you're converted. You can even renounce your title in many cases, and you're still considered a Jew. So, and I know people who have done a conversion and then years later wanted to renounce their conversion, and they've had their letters returned. So, whether you choose to practice Judaism after that is up to you, but that does happen. Now, I call it a half conversion, and children and adults, boys, especially, they do what is called a hatafat dam brit, which is not a circumcision. It's a prick of blood. And then they do what is called a fast bet din. And that's for someone who maybe, for instance, you are married to someone who is Jewish, but you're not Jewish in the case of a gentleman, or or in the case of a wife, you've had children together, you're married for years, or maybe just you have one parent who's Jewish and one parent's not, and you lived with someone for a long, long time, your dad, but your mom's not Jewish, and you know a lot about the Jewish culture. Like, you've been to holidays, you've been to synagogue, you know enough about the Jewish culture that you going through a whole year of conversion is not necessarily what they need. So they have it's a faster bet din. And what they do is they have a bet din, which is a group of rabbis that come together. And it's kind of like a little bit of a test. It's not a stressful test by design. It's really just to make sure that you understand what you're committing to and you understand what that involves. So you wouldn't pass a bet din if you didn't know that Hanukkah wasn't the most important holiday of the year. Or when they ask you, what do you do on Yom Kippur, you know what that is. Or they ask you what the Torah is. So no one's going to ask you to read Torah. They're probably going to ask you to say the Shema. They're not going to ask you really complicated stuff, but they want to know that you really understand what the commitment is as a Jew. But you kind of know that already. If you don't know that, if you don't know these things, then you go through a full conversion as an adult. The other thing that is kind of a modern thing that's happening, and it's happening in some like humanist organizations, or I think I've heard it a couple times in Reformed or some independent Havara, where if you have a baby, you either immerse them right away or you wait for the B'nai Mitzvah. And I have known several people, especially being in the military and having gone to different military congregations where it's small Havarot, instead of having the baby go through everything and then having them renounce it because the baby doesn't know, the baby lives a Jewish life. And then when they reach their B'nai Mitzvah, it's super important that they get their certificate and they go through everything for the B'nai Mitzvah, because then at that point, they themselves are basically agreeing to join the Jewish population. Does anybody have any questions about conversion?
I have a question about the mother being Jewish. I tried to to voice it, but I was on mute and forgot.
Oh, okay.
So I realized when you went on to conversion, you didn't hear me.
Oh, yeah.
I was just confused. I understand if your mother is Jewish, then you're Jewish. I always knew that. But you say if your grandmother was Jewish, does that mean if your grandmother, and there is an unbroken genealogical line, what from your Jewish great grandmother to you, that got me confused. So can you explain that a little more?
Right.
What's a genealogical unbroken line from your Jewish great grandmother to you?
Okay, so for instance, let's do it this way. My daughter is Jewish. Okay, my daughter's Jewish because I'm Jewish.
Yes.
Because my grandmother is Jewish, and because my great grandmother is Jewish. So now we can go through 4 generations. So my daughter to myself, to my mother, to my great grandmother. So we can go through 4 generations. And if as long as there's an unbroken genealogical line, okay, to your great grandmother, you are considered Jewish. Does that make sense?
Yes, except that if your mother's Jewish, you're always Jewish. So,
okay. So the reason why this is an important concept is I'm the perfect example about why this is an important concept. My mother died when I was 5 years old. Okay. So we're going to talk about in the exceptions, there's something called a lapsed Jew. Okay. And when we talk about that, you'll understand that a lapsed Jew is someone who was raised without life cycles and holidays. and or was raised in an inconsistent religious group. So why they make this distinction is that they're saying no matter what happens if you're a woman to you in your life, if you know for a fact that your grandma was Jewish, okay, it doesn't matter. You're still Jewish. Or your great grandmother through you, one more, you can go up to your great grandmother if it's your daughter, they're still Jewish. They're just saying that it's just their way of saying, listen, this is how far we can stretch this. And so even if your mother didn't practice Judaism, you can still go back to your grandmother. Do you know what I'm saying? As long as you're still all Jewish. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
So
we can talk about this another time. I don't need to prolong this. We can move on and we can go back to it.
Yeah, it's just this is where the practice comes in. And so unless someone has a question about conversion, then we'll talk about it more when we get to this last column here.
Okay.
Does anyone have a conversion question? Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk about that more here, but there's always exceptions. So, and the exception depends on the denomination. And I just want to tell you, I'm using the word denomination because people are familiar with it. But really, when we think of Jewish or being a Jew or practicing religion, in Judaism, we really don't have denominations. We have really technically what's a stream of practice. So, for instance, the conservative stream of practice, the conservative way of practicing. So they're not really denominations as such, but because the Christian world uses the word denomination and people kind of understand what that means, it's easiest for me to use that. So here's some exceptions. Say if you're born of a Jewish father or you're born of a Jewish grandfather, are you Jewish? Okay, well, it depends. If you're a humanist, you're definitely Jewish. If you're Reformed and it was a Jewish father, you're probably Jewish. So, but that's not this woman line, right? You weren't born of a Jewish mother. You were born of a Jewish father. That's because in the Reformed congregations, they have determined that as long as you have one Jewish parent or not, that you are considered Jewish. Okay. Now, this lapsed Jew thing, we're going to come back to this again. If you're a humanist Jew, if you follow the humanist practice, you can have a Jewish great grandmother or a Jewish great grandfather. You can have no practice in the middle, no life cycles, no holidays. You're still considered a Jew. However, if you're in conservative and you are born of a Jewish father, you are considered of the Jewish, you're part of the Jewish group, but you are not Jewish in the terms of religious practice. So I want you to understand that as we go deeper down, we're going from the broad category of Judaism down to the narrower category of religious practice Judaism. Okay? But we're starting with the birth thing because that's the easiest. This is actually the easiest to get out of the way. Is your mom Jewish? Yes or no? Did you convert? Yes or no? Okay. Well, you still have a question. Now we go to the exceptions. Okay. Do you fall into one of these exceptions? Okay. The other one is, as we said, have you been adopted as a baby? Because some people, when you're adopted as a baby, now say, listen, let's wait for the B'nai Mitzvah. We don't need to go through all this. And some people say, yes, we need to go all through this. And you need to do the Hatafat Dam Brit if you're circumcised or not. It just depends what group you're following. Now, there's another set of Jewish people, and this happens a lot, especially in middle age. Maybe you know your mom was Jewish or you know your dad was Jewish, and maybe you saw a menorah, or maybe that's all they did was every year they lighted the menorah. Or maybe every year your dad or your mom went to synagogue twice a year and you never understood why. Or they decided they were going to let you make your choices when you get older. This is what we call a lapsed Jew. And that means you were raised without life cycles and holidays. And this is important because a lot of times some of these groups, like the conservative group, the reform group will make their decision on who needs a conversion and who needs a fast bet din based on how much religious experience, life cycles, and holidays you received as a child or you received in your lifetime. Maybe you didn't get anything as a child, but when you were 18, you decided, you found out you were a Jew, and now you went to Jewish services and did Jewish things from college on. So how much of this life cycle holiday, how much of this Jewish world do you understand? Because the reason why these are important is because the main part of being a Jew, more so than when you look at Christianity and other religions, is not what we believe, which is kind of funny to say. The main part of being a Jew is what we do. Judaism is more about doing than believing. We do believe in one God, and that's important. So I don't want to say that's not important, but I want to tell you that when we're talking about who is a Jew, we're talking about categories of what we do. Does that make sense to people? Okay.
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't want to get too off on a tangent because I know we're already at 7:30 here. But Israel, they like the rights of return.
Yes.
It's down now to like a one grandparent. Is that correct?
Correct. You need to have one grandparent.
So why is that more of a how do I say, a liberal or a generous approach than maybe like historic Orthodox, Judaism or something like this?
Okay, good question. And and actually, right of return is something I was going to talk about, and then I didn't put it in here because that's a whole big thing I think we should get to later. But the reason why is because Israel, simply, this is going to be silly, Israel's made up of Jews. And Israel's goal is to what? Collect all the diaspora Jews or all the scattered Jews together. And how can they do that if they don't allow everyone who has intermarried, everyone who has maybe not been practicing? How can they collect all the Jews together if they start to say, well, if you don't have a Jewish mother, you can't come. If you didn't have a this, you can't come. So because Israel is for the Jewish people and a Jewish population, in 1970, when they developed and passed the law for right of return, they had to figure out who was Jewish and who was not. And they've made a lot of mistakes in those decisions. But one of the things they did get right is to say, listen, we need to understand that after this crazy world split everyone up again after World War II, we can't be choosy. If we want our people back, we have to take our people in all shapes and sizes. Now, that doesn't mean that the Orthodox Church or the Orthodox synagogue, is going to let you come up and say an aliyah. But because Judaism, and I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit, Judaism is not just a religion. It's also a people. It's also a group of a genetic group. It's not a race. I just want to make sure you guys know it's not. We're made up of all races. We're made up of all peoples, but it's a group of peoples. They're different peoples. And because it's a group of peoples, Israel has been on the forefront of understanding that it doesn't matter as long as you have one grandparent who's Jewish. That is where they draw their line. So that's the same line as the Reform. Mostly the Reform draws the line at. As long as you have a Jewish grandparent, you're Jewish. So, and that's just because as people intermarry, as things change, it's collecting people before they totally lose their identity or they forget. Most people, just so you know, really quick, and then I'll move on. Most people that think about it. You know who your grandmother is. You know who your great-grandmother is. But a lot of people, do you know who your great-great-grandmother is? Or if you know who your great-great-grandmother is, do you even know if they're Jewish or not? In some cases, maybe you do, but in some cases, you might not. So what they're getting at and what they're understanding is the more time that goes, if they say, yes, and you need to have this clear, unbroken line, there's a lot of people who they would lose. Does that make sense? Or did I lose you?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Because how can you populate a country, right, if you don't have the people that came from the country? So, and that's really the big part of it. Now, is conversion necessary? So I want to just finish this last point, and I just want to let you know, if you want to participate in a Jewish synagogue, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish. 95% of all synagogues, including Chabad, including Orthodox, will let you participate in the synagogue life. Now, does that mean you can do certain things like read from the Torah or get an aliyah? No, it doesn't. But I'm telling you that if your goal is to just be part of the Jewish group, you can, and there have always been since the time of Exodus, non-Jews living among us. And that's in the Torah, and you could read that in the Hebrew Bible in many different places where non-Jews lived in harmony and they followed the same rules as Jews. So if your only goal is to be part of the Jewish people and the Jewish community, conversion is not necessary. But if you want full access to everything, full rights, full responsibilities, then a conversion may be necessary. So, and this will make more sense as we keep going. Okay, so you can be also a Jew by land and location. So this is where the Jewish denominations and where tradition started. So just remember, in the past, your country, your land, or your ruler decided who was or was not Jewish for you. You didn't get to decide sometimes. You may know you're Jewish, but if you happen to live in Poland at a certain time, there was someone who told you, you may be Jewish, you may not be Jewish anymore. The Romans told the Jews living in Jerusalem at one point that there's no such thing as Judaism anymore. Well, you know, the people of Israel, the children of Israel. And what did they do? They burnt down the first temple and scattered everybody. So sometimes it's politics, but sometimes today it's the strict interpretation of the Jewish law who would decide you are a Jew or wasn't a Jew. So what happens if a man and a woman had a baby and they were Jewish and the mom dies and the dad is left with the baby? Sometimes in the past, there's been instances and stories of the fact that they didn't consider that baby Jewish anymore because the mother died when the baby was young. And nowadays, that's not the case, but that's how rabbinic law went before around 1000, the Common Era 1000. It was whatever politic or whatever rabbi was running the show. So if you're a Jew by location and land, this is the first way we broke people up. And the main three, okay, are Ashkenazi, which I'm sure you've all heard, Hasidim, and Sephardi. So Ashkenazi are what we typically call the Jews who lived in European Jewry, Russian Jewry, sometimes Ireland, and then later on, as the German Jews moved to America, primarily Ashkenazi Jews in America after 1840. So Hasidim is just a sect out of Ashkenazi that was a more strict group, and that group actually is more European as well. And then there's Sephardi, and those are the people who are, we know in Spain, we know in, sometimes they lump Italians in there, and people of Portugal, of sometimes South America, because the Spaniards immigrated to South America. So we have three main areas, and just so you know, these three areas and these three descriptions of these groups of Jews are because of where they live, their location. So there are more different, these are the three, but there are many more different types. There's Uzbekistan or Ukrainian. There's Yemeni, which is still near Israel. There's Mizrahi, which is people of Egypt, the people of the Middle East. They never left, they were always there. There's the kind of Judaism I am, Italikim, which is another small sect. And sometimes they lump a Talakim in with, and Mizrazi in with Sephardi. Then there's Beta Israel, which is the Ethiopian Israel, Ethiopian Jewry, which is a very fascinating thing. And that's an ancient form of Israeli Jew. And they think they split off after the destruction of the Second Temple, basically. So all of these are what we call Jews of the diaspora. But I want to let you know one thing, and sometimes people forget about this. There's always been Jews living in Israel all throughout history. There's never been a time when they've ever been able to eradicate all the Jews from living in the land. They may have moved up a little bit or up a little bit here, but there's always been some Jews left in Israel. But most of us came or went to one of these places. Does anybody have any questions about any of these location and lands? And so one of the things that I'd like to say, if it helps you remember, you know, Ashkenazi Jews are the Jews of the matzo ball soup. Okay. If you need to think of where the Mizrahi and where the Yemeni and the Bukharian, they're the rice type Jews. So if you think about who eats matzo ball soup, who eats rice, I can tell I'm a cook. The Italikim Jews are the ones that are the pasta eaters, and the Beta Israel are the Ethiopian people. And I heard peanut soup is good. I've never had it. I like to use food to describe people rather than dress, because sometimes when people think of Jews, they think about their dress. And we get really weird permutations of Judaism when we think about how people dress, because technically you can't tell a Jew by how they dress. So, okay, Jewish by religious practice. So here we are, modern history, 1700. This is where modern Judaism begins. Okay, so now this is being a Jew by religious practice. And when people ask you what type of Jew you are, this is the first thing that modern Jews think of. So they think of the big three, which are conservative, reform, and orthodox. There's some new ones: reconstructionist, renewal, and humanist. So all these are by practice. Orthodox is a more traditional practice. It sticks to the Torah. Men and women are separated. Only men count in the Minyan, and they're basically more traditional. Okay, conservative is what we call egalitarian here. Hold on, I gotta admit. Okay, there we go. There's stuff. Okay, whoops. Let's go back. Yeah. Okay. So, so conservative is what we call egalitarian, and that basically means that as a conservative Jew, men and women count equally. Okay. Now, in Reform Judaism, men and women, those distinctions are not so, they're not really, it doesn't really matter. Conservative, it's not as big of a deal either, but Reform, it really doesn't matter. And so these religious practices split by how they look at who can read the Torah. For instance, Orthodox, I can't read the Torah. Conservative, I can. Reform, we can. When we get to these three, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and Humanist, these have all branched out of the conservative, Reform, and the Orthodox movement. Sometimes in Renewal, they thought, well, we went too far on one side, but you know what? We lost some of the mysticism and some of the ancient religious practices that Orthodox still has. So we're going to renew our spiritual part, but we're going to interpret the Torah different. With Humanist, they're saying, listen, Orthodox, I don't like that. That's too strict. I don't get it. They don't think about people. Conservative, that's still too strict. They're basically Orthodox. Reform, well, they're still, still too strict for me. I want to just look at the world the way I want to look at it. And so sometimes that is why they describe Humanist Judaism. Sometimes you'll hear someone say it's called hippie Judaism. And it's really more of a spiritual type of Judaism that doesn't focus on anything in particular. So if you don't have a particular view of God in a certain way, you may find yourself navigating towards Humanist Judaism. If you feel like you want a really big spiritual aspect, you may, but yet you're not so big on the strictures of this Torah portion has to be read this week. This one has to be read this week. You have to have 10 women, 10 men. You might go to renewal. And if you're Reconstructionist, there's a branch between them too, where they still like the conservative liturgy, but they like to reinterpret how they do things, like Reform. And so Orthodox, the laws are set. There's no interpretation. They're set. The rabbi makes a ruling based on old rulings, and that's it is. Conservative says, hey, things change. We made this new grain, this rule, there's a grain rule. We made this new grain, and we're going to say you can eat it because it's okay. Reform really goes into that as well, saying, listen, some of these things are not as important, and some of the major rules in some Reform congregations are not as a big deal. Like, for instance, less Reform people keep kosher than conservative or Orthodox. So, and then the one thing you need to know about this is in these, 6 that I'm explaining, which is why we're in this Jewish here, there is a whole panoplia, I can't even say it. There's a whole rainbow of combinations. So I explain to people that we are conservaform. When I was in Olam Tikva, I said we're conservadox. When we have someone in our synagogue who's Reconstructionist on one week, and then she said she's conservative on another week. So, and there's some people who do all of them. There's some Havara, which is a group of Jewish people who meet, and they rotate. So there is not a law or a rule that says you have to do it this way, because Jewish religion practice is made and lived in the congregational model. It's no longer, except for a few countries, there's no longer a head rabbi like the head pope that says, this is how you're going to do Catholic. There's no head Jew in America that says, this is how you're going to do Judaism. There's some great leaders out there who have great ideas, but really when it comes down to it, your congregation is the one, and your rabbi and your group that you have decided to align yourself with is the one who makes the religious practice what it is. Does anybody have any question about this slide? No? Okay. Okay. All Jews are tied together by a sense of Jewish identity. And this is the stuff that really makes what we are unique and makes our group unique. It's our traditions. If I'm a Talakim, I do this. If I'm Orthodox, I do this. If I have a ritual, if I'm Reform, this is how I sing this song. If I'm Orthodox, I may chant this song. Our values. Women and men can't touch each other before marriage. That's Orthodox. Conservative. Women and men, we need 2 people who are Jews on both sides to be married in a conservative synagogue. The language ties us together, all of us together, no matter if you speak Spanish or Russian or Italian or French or anything. The language of Hebrew ties us together. And the food ties us together, although the food does go back to regions. But yeah, there's some form of, soup, like matzo ball soup, whether it's an Italian version or a French version or a peanut soup type Ethiopian version. So we have these foods that are common of all of us. We always have a bread, whether we're Ethiopian or whether we're American. The food, the traditions, the rituals, the values, the language, all that stuff ties us together. And the best place to see that happen right now is in Israel, where you can see the melting pot, and people, as new Jews come in, you can see that grow and change right in front of you, history in the making. Okay, so do I have to fit into a category? Or where do I fit into these categories? So do you have to fit into a category? No, you don't have to fit into a category. Some people will visit a synagogue here or visit a synagogue here. Some people will join what we call a Havara. Again, I mentioned that's a group of Jews that get together to worship. It's a small group of Jews usually. And there are Havara all over the world, and some have weekly meetings, some have monthly meetings, some rotate Orthodox one week and conservative or reform the next week, or some just do a humanist. There are groups of Havara that get together for people who aren't sure what they believe anymore, but they know they're Jews and they want their children to have a little bit of experience in the Jewish world. So they get together for holidays and they get together for things. So where you fit in the category, if you want a category, we can find that category for you if that helps you understand your identity as a Jew. But do you need to fit into these categories? The answer is really no, unless there's something specific you want to accomplish. So for instance, if you want to get married in a Jewish synagogue, you need to fit into a category so that the person who will marry you can marry you. If you want to read the Torah, you have to fit into a category. So that's when the categories are important. But most of your life cycle events, you don't, and most of your holiday events, you don't need a category for. So do questions? Everyone's all set. Am I boring everybody? Okay.
No, it's fascinating, actually. Thank
Okay.
you.
I just want to make sure I didn't lose you. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about Jewish. Okay. I know we are getting to the end of our time here, but one of the important things is, we remember how we said in the beginning, we started to use the word Jewish because the word Jew, if it's used as a noun or if it's used as an adjective, can sometimes have a negative or a positive connotation. So then now we have this Jewish thing, and I want to actually show you. I sent you a link to a YouTube video, and I think everybody got that. And if you get a chance to look at that link, you'll understand that there's also Jewish, okay? And sometimes it's a joke and sometimes it's not a joke. But like I said, in this slide here, there's an old rabbi joke that says that anyone that's less observant than I am is Jewish, and using those air quotes, Jewish. And Jewish used in that way can sometimes be derogatory. So I want to have people understand that you may at times meet people who are more observant than you. And if you know where you fit in your pyramid and you are comfortable wherever you categorize yourself, or if you're comfortable not categorizing yourself, don't let anyone, whether it's rabbi or anyone, tell you you're not a Jew or you don't worship or you don't fit into any category that they need you to fit in. Okay? There's a whole, as we said, range of Judaism, and you don't have to fit in any category. But what do they mean when they say Jewish? Okay. And basically what they mean when they say Jewish, I just wanted to check. Okay. What they mean when they say Jewish is that you don't quite know enough. And in that cartoon or that video that I sent you a link for, one of the things that it shows you is, for instance, a gentleman is asking someone what about death? Okay, how do the Jews believe? And he's like, well, I don't know. And so they're saying he's Jewish. And that's kind of something that a lot of people don't know. But I'll tell you the one that a lot of people may say someone's Jewish. And I even tease my brother about this. The gentleman in this video is eating a ham and cheese sandwich. Well, if you go to synagogue by me, where I'm at right now, you'll notice that I never serve meat and I never serve dairy together, because that's one of the prohibitions in food. And so someone might tease you about being Jewish because you've mixed dairy and meat. And what they're saying in a nice way, a funny way, or a mean-spirited way is you're not Jewish enough to know better. Okay. And so I really want to say that there are things that are funny and can be ribbing about this, as long as you take them in your light, saying, okay, listen, that is funny. My brother eats crab. Okay. I wouldn't touch a shellfish if you paid me $20. I'd have to be starving to touch a shellfish. And so my brother and I tease each other about being Jewish. And so I'm like, yeah, and I tell my brother Max, you're Jewish today when he does that. Or, you know, be careful, don't bring any Jewish things into my house, meaning if you bring bacon into my house, I'm going to kick you out of my house. But that's my brother and I. We tease back and forth about being Jewish. I go to synagogue on Friday, most Fridays. I don't think my brother has ever gone to synagogue, ever. Like, I think he practiced getting out of synagogue from the early age of 5. So what I'm getting at is there's different levels of practice. And when you find your level of practice, there might be someone always above you that's going to say, this person's not Jewish enough. But you need to stop and you need to say, am I practicing the Judaism the way I feel comfortable and the way it honors my soul? And then in turn, that will honor God's soul. Okay. So, am I saying that if you practice Judaism and you go out and eat ham sandwiches and eat crab every day, is that the best way to do it? In my opinion, probably not. But you know what? In Israel, for right of return, this goes back to Mike's question, no one has a checkboard that says, listen, did you eat crab this week? Did you eat ham and cheese this week? Nope, you can't get back into Am Yisrael. You're not part of us. That's never going to happen. Are you part of this Jewish crowd through location, through genetics, or I mean, through, birth, which is technically genetics, sorry. Do you fit into this group? And or what do you do? How do you practice? Those are the ways you get into this group. Does anybody have any questions about that? Nope. Okay.
No.
Okay, so let's do this quick because we're getting short of time. So I want to talk about Minyan math because this is another place where people need to figure out where they fit or what category they're in. And this is one that can really hurt people's feelings. And this is one where things are somewhat changing. So for instance, I want to tell you one quick thing, and I still struggle on this. When you go into a Torah service or you go into a Friday night service, just so you know, there's a prohibition. You never should count people using numbers. People are always more than numbers. And even going back to the ancient days in the Talmud and stuff, and I can't remember exactly with the tractate that it's in right now, so I apologize. But there is a prohibition against counting people. Because as you know, we have gone through program after program in our thousands of years of history. And there's always a prohibition that says a person is a person and they are not a number. So for instance, how not to count 10 people, or 10 men, the reason why I say that is because I am still learning how to translate a way to count 10 men without counting. So some people say the Shema and use the Shema to count people. Some people use the Aleph Bet to count people. My problem is I always fail because I'll go Aleph Bet, Vet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het, Tet, and I just counted people in my head anyway. Do you know what I'm saying? So counting 10 people is making sure that we never forget the humanity of each individual person. But it's an area where people may definitely categorize you, and some people may definitely come up and ask pointed questions. And if you feel that you don't want to be facing some of these questions, you can absolutely say, listen, I'm not comfortable with this question, or please don't count me in your minyan. But the traditional minyan is 10 Jewish men who are descended from a Jewish woman or a Jewish mother or have converted. So if you go, what happens to me when I go to Universal, or what happens to my husband, we go to Universal. If you're around Harry Potter's castle at any given time near Minka at the end of the night, you will probably find an Orthodox man that's looking to help you form a minyan. So for instance, my husband gets grabbed. Are you Jewish? You'll hear them kind of around. Is anyone Jewish? We're trying to find a minyan. And so they are looking for 10 Jewish men who are either converts or are Orthodox by birth or Jewish by birth. They'll take conservatives sometimes at Universal, and sometimes Orthodox and conservative they'll take. I'm not sure, but they do ask you a whole bunch of super quick questions. They grab you in a corner, they dive in really quick. You need to be in that group. You need to be certain categories to be in that traditional minyan. Okay, egalitarian minyan. We have an egalitarian minyan. Okay, you cannot count, and when I say not count, again, remember, you can say some kind of prayer, you can say your aleph bet. You get to 10 letters or 10 words, and they can be men or women over the age of 13 who have become bat mitzvah or become bar mitzvah, whether or not they've actually done the ceremony. Because remember, when you're bar bat mitzvah, you don't have to do the ceremony, you just have to turn that age. So it doesn't matter in a lot of times in the conservative, if you are a Jew and you are of a birth of a woman, you are a convert, what your denomination is, a conservative, you can have an Orthodox person. You just need 10 people for the minyan, and they can be men or women. Okay. Now, in this second group, this egalitarian minyan, if you're sitting in front of Universal and you're trying to find a conservative minyan, and you find an Orthodox person wearing his kippah, and he's trying to find a minyan too, and you say, hey, let's make our own minyan, and the guy will say, sure, but he's like, oh, my wife is counting. My wife is number one here. Okay, he's going to say, oh, no, I can't be in your minyan. Okay, because the Orthodox minyan breaks unless it is 10 straight men. Okay, does everyone understand that stuff so far? Okay, so there's a new minyan. The women's movement in Israel is leading this charge. Okay, and it's just like Noah and the ark, 2 by 2. So a lot of women are saying, listen, this is not fair. We're Orthodox women. We know how to pray. We know how to daven. We know how to do this. We should have access to everything you do. But we understand through Jewish law that this is the way you do stuff. So we're trying to make a new rule. And in some synagogues, popping up all over the world and USA and country, they have an Orthodox egalitarian minyan. And all that means is you need 20. You need 20 women and you need 20 men. And the congregation agrees that they will not reach minyan level until they have 10 men and 10 women. And so it's kind of an incentive there to make sure that you have both sides, because you need 10 full sides. Now, sometimes the women are put in a separate room, which obviously you can tell from my tone I have an opinion about. Sometimes the rooms just have a open door between them. Sometimes they have a makiza between them, but it's a new way that they're trying to allow women to be equal participants in the service without diminishing the way men feel they need to pray in the Orthodox service. So it's called an Orthodox egalitarian minyan, and you need 20. So you better know most your aleph bet to count that high. Okay. So one of the last things I want to talk about is counting in a crisis. And I think this one's fun because every so often I bring this up in synagogue if we don't make our minyan. So in the past, especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of rabbis used to say, well, put the Torah out, the Torah counts. And I'm telling you, in most of the Jewish training and most of the stuff from rabbis, they have shown that, and they have gone through all their Jewish rulings and their laws, and you technically cannot put a Torah out and say that Torah is counted as another person. Now, the reason why people would say that the Torah counted as a person, because of the next one, and I call it give a boy a humash. I don't know if you've ever seen in a video those young boys that daven. You see these miracle kids who are like 3 to 5, and they're reading the Torah from the scroll in synagogue, and they do it 5 times faster than most of us, and don't miss a word. there are those boys. They raise early and they're great. And what they're saying in some of these things is that if you have a boy who hasn't made the age of bar mitzvah yet, if you have him hold a humash, which is the prayer book that we use, or it's got the stuff in it, he can count as a person for a minyan, okay, in a time of crisis. So you have 9 people, you're sitting in front of Universal, you have a yard site tonight, which, and you really want to do your yard site because you're very observant. Technically, if you had a boy and a siddur, you can put them together and he could, and he could read Torah and understand Torah at his level. He technically could be a 10. Now, the reason why they say use the Torah is because in 2 different places in the writings, it doesn't say give a boy Hamash, it says a boy in a Torah scroll. So for instance, if you had a boy who could read the Torah before his age of bar mitzvah, if he were to hold the Torah, he and the Torah would count as a whole person in a crisis situation. There's some other strange situations, but most of them, as they explain, are from misinterpretations of the law. But there is also another thing. In some places, everything and everyone counts because they do it our way. So for instance, if you are in a humanist group, minions probably aren't going to matter because you are going to take whatever training or whatever prayers you do, and you're going to put them into poetry or put them into non-standardized forms. And so then that occasion, you don't need a Torah. Or maybe you're going to read the Torah in English, so you don't need a minyan. Or you're going to say yard site by going to the ocean and throwing a rock into the ocean. And that's your way of expressing your remembrance for someone. So they don't need minions because what they do is they find different ways to express their Judaism without that. So that's minyan math. And basically, I now have gone through everything, the 101 stuff. So if if you guys want to stay for a few minutes, I can definitely answer some questions. I think I had some questions, but I don't know if I've answered them or if we still need to go through them. Trying to find a slide for sure. Okay, there we go. So does anyone have any questions?
I have one question.
Sure, go ahead.
So you said that the Jews aren't a race, right?
No,
but the
Jews are not a race. So I said it funny, but I do have to be super careful. The Jews have a genetic component, but they're not technically a race. So I'm sorry.
So yeah, so like if you were to to do a DNA test, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, these are the original peoples of Israel. Like they trace their lineage, correct? At a genetic level?
Correct. They can, yes. And that's the thing that we have to be super careful of. There is a genetic component to Judaism. Obviously, if we're talking about a mom and a baby and a grandma and a whatever, or your father or your mother, there is this genetic component. But where it becomes not a race is we have to realize that Jews come in all shapes and sizes, all colors, all languages. There is no, like with a race, if we're talking about the Italian race of people, there's a universalism. Everyone comes from that group. But as Jews, we don't come from a single race. There's no single way to describe what a Jewish person is from without just we come from all areas, all countries, all, even back in the day, we came from, different, the Assyrians attacked and were this, and this attacked and were this. And so I feel like I'm letting you down because I have to tell you, oh, here we go. We're all size, shape, and colors. And if it were a racial distinction, you wouldn't be able to say that. So we have to be careful. You couldn't, and the other reason why we're not a race, and this is an important fact, that's why I'm stopping for this, is you can't join or convert to a race. Okay. So if you want to join the Jewish group, or if you want to convert to Judaism, you can do that. It doesn't matter who you are. If we were a race, you couldn't, because, for instance, if you're Ethiopian, you're Ethiopian, right? You can't say, I can't say tomorrow, I would like to be Ethiopian. You know, kids in my son's high school, my son, they ask, what's your pronoun? And my son said the other day, I'm an attack helicopter. Okay, if attack helicopters were races, right? He could not become an attack helicopter. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? You know, like,
yeah, I understand that element, but anyone that doesn't have like converted elements, like just say that the people that have the strict DNA markers, right? From those tribes, that's a shared, and maybe it's not a race, but it's like an ethnic, there's a genetic component to that besides the converts and so forth.
Right. And you're right. There is a genetic component, but there's multiple streams of genetic components. And that's
people that intermix and so forth.
Yes, exactly. So there are some people that can absolutely trace their DNA so far back that, you know, it's amazing. And then there's some of us, like me, who probably, I don't know where I could trace it back to, because my family's so strange. And so one of the things, and I love the way we would describe it, we're this one big dysfunctional family, where all these groups, all these whatever, and we do all these different things. And yes, some of us may be born into our family, our Jewish family. Some of us are adopted into our Jewish family, and some of us choose to join the family. But correct, it has, and that's where it gets dangerous when people who don't understand, they're saying that that's where we get into problems, where they say, listen, well, you're racially a Jewish person. No, genetically, your parents were Jewish and that's it. But, you know, there's not one race, there's not one, it's multiple races and multiple groups, and you know what I mean? So did that answer that question a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So does anyone else have another question?
I have a couple.
Sure.
Just some clarification.
Sure.
When you were talking about how not to make a minyan,
Yes.
and you were talking about the Orthodox way of not making a minyan,
Right.
will they accept, you said something about they will accept a man who has converted to Judaism? They really will? I didn't realize that.
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. I just want to be absolutely 100% clear with you guys. If conversion is a time bomb, a ticking time bomb, but not because of what you think. If you are converted to Judaism, you are just like the man standing next to you or the woman standing next to you that was born Jewish. The time bomb part of this is actually kind of some of the discussions that came in that 1970 right of return discussion, is what tradition or what conversion will we accept? And that's where the time bomb is. So that Jewish man next to you will accept you if you're a convert, but the catch is you have to be probably an Orthodox convert, or I have seen them. In fact, this happened at Universal for Us. They accepted my husband because he was conservative. So because they needed the minyan. So conservative was good enough for him for that. But now it sounded like from the questions that they ask you that if my husband was reformed, that they would not have accepted him. So
I didn't even realize Orthodox would do a conversion. That's why I asked. So
well,
I guess they will.
The Orthodox conversion often takes at minimum a year and sometimes up to 3 years. It's the most intensive conversion, but it's the one that often people seek out the most because that's the one that's accepted by everyone. So if you had to say there's a gold star or gold standard, the Orthodox one is the most complete. It's the hardest to get into. It's the hardest to find a Jewish Orthodox rabbi to work with you on. It takes the longest, but no one anywhere would ever question, are you a Jew if you do an Orthodox conversion? The problem in the time bomb that's happening is in this country, most of the Jews in this country now are Reformed. So the problem is that with the majority or conservative movement in Israel, or the Jewish Orthodoxy in Israel, they often don't accept Reform conversions as conversions. So people are spending a year or more, thousands of dollars of their money. They go over to Israel, or even they go to their conservative wife or future wife's rabbi and say, listen, I converted to Reform Judaism. And the rabbi says, oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You converted through a Reform rabbi. So you have a choice. You can convert through conservative again, or you can convert through Orthodoxy again if you want to, and then I can marry you, but I can't marry you. So it's a very difficult position if you're in Israel. It's awful in Israel. It's just terrible there. And it's hard here. And it's becoming a huge problem because people are wanting to convert. The conversions are easier to seek the lower down the pole you are as far as worshiping practices. And the problem is, unless you stay in that lane, which is if you're Reform, you stay in the Reform lane, you may have problems if you move up the hierarchy. So is a Jewish man going to still think you're a Jew? Yeah, but here's the Jewish, remember, are you Jewish enough? Are you considered Jewish enough? Because below you isn't, right? The old rabbi joke, you're not going to be Jewish enough to do some of the stuff he needs you to do. Like he can't marry you. He won't do your baby naming. Do you know what I mean? Stuff like that.
So I have a couple more things and quick. Am I to understand by what you said that you don't have to have a bar or a bat mitzvah ceremony to be considered to be a bar or bat mitzvah?
You become, and that's the language that's important. You become bar mitzvah or become bat mitzvah on the day you turn 13 years old, or 12, depending if you're a girl. 13.
So I am now bat mitzvah, even though I've never had one.
Right.
That's
so
very new to me.
it is. So you are not, because you're a full adult now, able to take part in the Jewish worship life. So you become that. It's just like us saying, hey, on your 18th birthday, what do you become in America? You become an adult. Okay. When you're 13 in the Jewish church, you become a what? A Jewish adult. You don't have to do anything to become 18, do you? You just wake up and now you're an adult according to the law. In Jewish law, you wake up on your 13th or your 12th birthday if you're a girl, and you become a bar or bat mitzvah. But one of the rising trends, and one of the reasons why, for those of you who are in my adult Hebrew school like Linda, I keep asking, is anyone interested in an adult bar or bat mitzvah, is because one of the fastest ways to build confidence is to go through that process. Where else do you get that training and the work and the questions answered? And you really, by the time you become and go through the process of fully becoming bar bat mitzvah, you really get your confidence to be able to operate in the synagogue where you became a Jewish adult. So it's just a matter of building confidence and really feeling like once you have developed that confidence, you really know that you belong. You know, it just makes you feel better about yourself if you need that. So some people don't need it. Some people don't. Some people need it. Some people don't.
And anyway, my last comment is just that conservatism in Judaism has definitely evolved since I was growing up, because I was raised conservative and they did not accept women as a minyan. They did not allow women to participate in anything, even if they had had a formal bat mitzvah ceremony. So that's changed a lot.
It is.
I would never have been able to do an aliyah or stand up or do anything, and they had to have 10 men.
And a lot of time when they started, women were only allowed to do their bat mitzvah on one of the weekday services. You couldn't even do it on a Friday or a Saturday if you were a woman. You had to come in during the week when the evening group was, and I lost my train of thought, where the evening group was doing their prayers. So, you know, at night when they had their minyan, you had to come in, and that's when you did yours. You didn't even get a real service. So things have changed greatly, and for the better. At least I feel for the better. Maybe some people don't feel that way. So
The Orthodox would not feel that way, but I'm with you. Anyway,
Yes.
that's the end of my comments. I know we're running over time.
Does anyone else have another question? I don't know who's still there. Okay. Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, there. Okay. I do want to show one screen to you though. Let me share this screen. Okay. And then I can let you go unless anyone has another question. Okay. If you're interested, I found a video and I hope everyone can see it on my screen. This person is called, his name is Useful Charts, and I can send the link if you're interested. But if you ever really want to understand the differences between the denominations in America and how they came from, he has a great video. It's about 40 minutes long. And from all the research and stuff that I have done, this to me in 39 minutes is the most concise grouping of, or a video that puts the main points together in one easiest to understand place. So like I said, it's called Useful Charts. And this, I think the name of this one is here. Let's go right to the back.
Hi, this is Matt Baker.
Sorry. It's Matt Baker at Useful Charts. And this is I think the Jewish Denominations Explained. So I just wanted to let you know that about that. Let me come back to here and let me put this main screen. I was going to say, I had one other, let me just double check one other thing. So I think we talked about some of the tribes and stuff, but okay. If you are Jewish, the last point I do really want to get across, if your father is Jewish, we are what we call conserviform at our synagogue, okay? If your father is Jewish, you are considered Jewish in our synagogue, okay? If we have a conservative rabbi at the moment who is registered with someone, okay, like maybe Rabbinical Assembly, which is the Union for Conservative Judaism, okay, and your father is Jewish, that rabbi could say, because of my licensing, I can't marry you, okay, or I can't do your baby naming. But most of the rabbis that we have, the unaffiliated and all the Reform rabbis are going to say, sure, no problem, you're Jewish, I can do your baby naming, I can do whatever, because you're fully a Jew. So in our congregation, our stance is that if you have a Jewish father or a Jewish mother, you are Jewish. So I hope that makes sense. And then the other thing that I wanted to say to everyone is, and we didn't really get a chance to get into it, but what you do in a synagogue and what prayers you pray and what you do depends on these divisions that you have picked. And so, for instance, if you've gone the conservative tract, there is a group, the Rabbinical Assembly, the Union of Conservative Judaism. They have laws and rules that you follow if you would like to be in their tract. If you are Reform and you do the, sorry, I forgot the name of the Reformed one. It's pretty much all the same. Union of something or group of this or Hebrew Union, you know, they're all pretty close. They all have their rabbinical schools. They all have their related authority groups, and they all have their own books of prayer, like Reformish Mishkan Tefillah. Lev Shalem, the new book we're getting, is conservative. The Orthodox book has a few. Sephardi has their own book. Italikim, I have my own book. I can't read it because I'm very poor in Italian right now. So they all have their own books. And how you pray, how you do the prayers, how the combinations are put together largely depend on your group. And so you can go to an independent group on the beach in California. There's some that seem really fun. And they might not even have a book. They maybe have made their own book. And maybe all their prayers are in English and all their prayers don't even seem like prayers, but they are praying everything. It's just that their Amidah maybe is part of a poem and part of a song and part of something else, because they're independent and they can go the way they want to go. If you're Reformed, you probably are going to use one of two books. If you're conservative, you're going to use one of two books. So the prayers that you pray and how you follow it depend on what your denominations are and the prior Jewish law that governs those denominations. Our synagogue is technically independent right now, although we follow the conservative reform track. And that just means, and for instance, there's other synagogues that follow a two-track model too. I believe Adat Re'im is Reconstructionist on Friday and conservative liturgy on Saturday, which follows their school of thought and their training of their rabbis at their rabbinical school. There's a rabbinical school that I am looking at testing to get into, and they're the same way. They teach conservative, but their school of thought says conservative liturgy and more flexibility on some of the other things. So I think those are some of the questions we had. If there's any other questions, now's the time. Oh, go ahead.
Not really a question, but just thank you very much, Madison, for going through all this stuff. It's really good to have this information. So it's just good background information and trying to help everybody figure out, where they fit in, where they don't fit in, and I think it's just good information to have, and thank you for putting this all together. And I hope to see everybody Friday night. We're going to have services in the chapel as usual, and yeah. So thanks again, everybody, for coming and participating, and some really and I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend for the whole thing, but the questions I heard were really good and insightful questions, and keep them coming when you come to services. Keep them coming. Ask Madison whenever, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks again.
So the last thing I want to say to people, I just want to remind you that that when in fact I'm going to stop recording now, that I will send you guys all a link when this process is. It's been taking a little bit longer to